All right, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing time so far. Our next talk is titled The Banking Industry's AI Transformation. Please join me in welcoming our panelists to the virtual stage. And I'll hand it over to Rashu, our moderator.
Trika, thank you so much. We are very fortunate to have 5 panelists, all come from different financial institutions within US and with a great background in data, analytics, AI, and machine learning. So I'm really personally excited to be part of this panel, and hopefully you all will hear a great perspective from everybody. What I'm going to do is just get a little bit of introduction going on. I'll start and then hand it over to my co-panelist here. I'm Rashu Garg. I head the enterprise data analytics products and solutions at Regions Bank. So essentially, we're solving interesting problems like fraud, contact center conversational AI, marketing analytics, and pretty much all the things that bank care about for our customers. I've been with the bank for about 2.5 years. Prior to that, I was at Capital One and Deloitte, for about 8 years. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Ryan. Ryan, please go ahead.
Thanks, Rashu. And it's my pleasure to join, and I really appreciate the invite. I'm the head of product here at Deepsee. We are a company that's really helping all our clients in the either financial or insurance space access their most complicated data, especially in unstructured formats, and use that to both learn about their business and to do automation processes that previously couldn't. Prior to joining Deepsee about 18 months ago, I spent the last Goldman Sachs, working in operations and engineering, helping a lot of complicated process and really gaining an understanding of what drives a lot of the trading functions globally throughout the bank.
Awesome, Ryan. Thank you so much, and excited to be part of the panel with you. Prashant, if you don't mind, I'll hand it over next to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Rashu. I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for the opportunity. My name is Prashant Dhingra. I work as a managing director at JPMorgan Chase. So my team owns machine learning use cases, where we build advanced machine learning use cases like algorithmic trading, etc. Prior to working at JPMorgan Chase, I worked at Google. I led machine learning development at Google. And prior to that, I worked at Microsoft, where there I worked in Bing, SQL Server, and Azure machine learning team. So since last 13 years, I've been working on machine learning. Prior to that, I used to be in software engineering. I have written a book on SQL Server and a chapter in machine learning.
Awesome, Prashant. It's great to have you on the panel. And quite frankly, I'm looking forward myself to hearing a lot of good things about your expertise and areas of work that you've done. So thank you for being part of it. Harish?
Hi, everyone. My name is Harish Doddi. I'm actually the founder and CEO of Datatron. At Datatron, we provide a MLOps and model governance platform, which facilitates the models that are built internally in financial institutions to quickly take them in a reliable environment in production. Prior to Datatron, starting Datatron, I was actually an early employee in places like Lyft, Twitter, and Snapchat, and have a lot of experience when it comes to building AI machine learning infrastructure systems from scratch and really driving the business performance through it. Excited to be here.
Awesome. Thank you, Harish. And I do agree, MLOps is extremely important for machine learning AI, especially a big component of that is software engineering discipline, applying that to machine learning AI and productionalizing and operationalizing ML AI into production. So great to hear from you and being part of the panel. Lastly, but not the least, Marina, thank you for introductions here.
Sure, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Marina Kaganovich. I head the US CIB digital compliance team at BNP Paribas, where I advise the firm on its digital initiative strategy with a particular focus on emerging technologies, digital assets, privacy, and cybersecurity. Prior to joining BNP, I held a compliance advisory role at Goldman Sachs, where I supported the firm's IT division And prior to that, I ran the compliance program at Thomson Reuters. Very excited to be here. Very pleased to be on a panel with such a distinguished guests and panelists. And just wanted to say by way of disclaimer that the views that I voice on this panel are my own and don't represent those of BNP.
Thank you, Marina. Really excited to be part of the panel and all the distinguished guests over here. So we'll start with our first question. And as you can see on the screen, banks have a lot of data. In fact, I would say probably it's one of the sectors which has got the most data about our customers. And also we've got a fiduciary obligation to really help our clients, help our customer with making the right decision from a financial point of view, which is a really big obligation for the banks and financial institution to do. My question for the panel here is, how do you, in your organization, leverage this data for AI, machine learning, and analytics? Prashant, I'll start with you, and then we can go through the panel one by one. So over to you, Prashant. Thank you.
Yeah, so organizations are collecting more data, and every organization is collecting more data, but world is changing faster too. So there are approaches needs to be used to utilize this data for AI. So few things we want to pay attention. First is we first need to ensure that we are handling the personally identifiable data correctly before we start using it in AI. So that is the first concern every organization needs to take care. Once we have taken care of personally identifiable data, then companies want to take advantage of the big data. That is good. However, big data also has its own cost. So again, these are my personal views and some of the approaches I have implemented at JPMorgan Chase and at Google, that we should try to leverage machine learning from less amount of data. So instead of focusing on big data, if one can figure it out, what is my goal data set? And the data set that has predictive power, but it represents the whole population and which is well governed, which is of good data quality, then one can apply machine learning in an appropriate manner. And it also handles the labeling issues, because getting a lot of data is easy, but getting labels is very expensive and error prone. So after personally identifiable information handling, we handle how we can create whole data set, which are compressed data set with high predictive power. And then we build model on those. Other areas where organizations to change their philosophies, organizations have been building software for years, and softwares are built using code. And there's a lot of focus on doing code rigor. But AI focus on data. So one needs to shift the focus from code rigor to data rigor. Because if we try to implement capabilities but just by writing code, then it's not an AI. It will not change with time. So that's the reason the shift needs to happen to data rigor. And accordingly, our build versus buy process also needs to be changed, because we are used to buying capabilities from outside and then plug it into the enterprises. But now the capabilities are dependent upon our internal data. So AI capabilities will not work as plug and play. So these are various things we pay attention to: personally identifiable data, how we can build model with less amount of data, code rigor to data rigor, and build versus buy process, which are key to start AI development.
Prashant, if I may, I really, one of the things that you said resonated there with me is that it's not always just a big data problem like traditionally is thought. In our experience in working with our partners, is it's often they want big data results with small data sets. And the ability to create that and capture the knowledge required from the experts that work with that data now in a non-scalable way. How do you capture their knowledge on a smaller data set and then apply it to large data sets?
Yeah.
And that's the biggest focus that we've worked at as far as Deepsee is. We think of this concept of like tribal knowledge. You go around to all the experts that across anywhere in the financial industry and capital markets. They know how to take this data, they know how to read it, how to interpret it, They can run through the Rolodex of, okay, when it's from this person, this is what it means, or from this client, this is how you interpret it. But how do you teach an AI or a machine learning model how to, learn that? We feel like that is the biggest challenge as far as, taking that and then progressing it into, something that can be automated and ran so the system can do what it does best and learn at scale. And that transfer of knowledge, I feel, is a big organizational challenge that we're working on and working with our clients on how do they achieve that and get those results they're looking for.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks a lot for the addition. Completely agree with you.
Yeah, I'd say like the only other piece too is oftentimes big data can solve for big trends, but it's often not, trend. It's often not, captured. Some of the metadata, some of the decisions that were made, oftentimes customers in their lake, they have data in its raw format, but not all the pieces that happen with it. And I think, organizationally, banks and really any industry that wants to be data driven has to be able to capture that whole data and then feed that into the AI model to get the best recommendations and outcomes that they're looking for.
Yeah, Ryan and Prashant, I'll add to it as well. And I totally agree with everything that you said from a foundational perspective. I think one of the sort of the learnings that I personally have had in the banks in my career is historically, we are so much used to at least, in a department, in operations, solving the problem from the data that we get in that department in a siloed basis. So take fraud as an example. We really look at, fraudulent checks or, label data around that to make the determination. But the real power of AI and analytics really expands when you are able to take the cross-functional data from cross departments and functions across the bank, right from the interactions and touch points that the customer has had in contact center, let's say, for example, branch, to what is their operating account, their balances, the velocity of changes, to where they're transacting, and marrying that data along with what you have been traditionally using that, let's say in that department itself, is key to how you're able to then really take a holistic view of customer data, transaction data, and applying it in a much more deterministic manner. So I think that's an it's got a lot of organization implications to it, because now the data is not tied to one organization, quite frankly. It's really how do you break the silos and barriers and take all of the data and apply it for the greater good, for the bank and for the customer.
I would actually echo the points, if you don't mind, just from a slightly different perspective. I think I think that data governance is one of those aspects that's crucial, but that's often, to some extent, I don't want to say ignored, but to some extent, not really top of mind, because everyone is so excited about innovating and about implementing AI solutions. And, depending on the type of organization that you're dealing with, really large, complex global organizations that have, their own house-built systems, their systems that get acquired through various mergers and acquisitions, vendor-built systems, they're all rather fragmented. So they maintain different types of data in different systems and applications, to varying degrees of accuracy, potentially. And really, before it can be leveraged to inform AI efforts, it needs to be normalized. Like, there needs to be a data governance process to ensure that the data is really fit for purpose and available in order to then train the AI. So I found that that's a critical piece to focus on, and to, especially when speaking with senior management and looking to get buy-in for implementing AI solutions, it's really important to also understand and have their support for having a strong data governance program, so that there is a golden source referential or multiple referentials that can be used by the AI to implement those innovative solutions.
I think that's a great point, Marina. I think part of it is that it feels in my own experience that every time they try to do that, that normalization or standardization across systems becomes the hardest part of it, because everyone has a reason why they chose to describe a concept in one way or represent it in another. And I feel even a lot of like mutualization efforts where they try to set up this central market infrastructure to clear trades, especially in the derivative over-the-counter markets. It's hard to agree to the right ISDA language to represent those and so forth. The part that we think is that using NLP and other advanced AI techniques, if you can interpret one record in one system and then a record in another system, or counterparty to counterparty, and then you can put this infrastructure in the middle to read and mirror exactly what those experts do right now, is that they know that this represented in this system equals A, even though this is written in it equals A, and you can have the model in the middle be that interpreting layer. That's how you get to like your data normalization. And then Raghu, also to your point, that's how you break down those data and process silos so that you can build a much more powerful and aggregated data set to solve more and more complex problems and identify trends that are ascending the way that these bank processes operate today.
Very well said, Ryan and Marina. I do want to hand it over to Harish, and Harish, get you an opportunity to kind of talk about this important area.
Yeah, definitely. I think as Marina said, definitely governance is very important when you handle this data. And unlike other industries, banks are definitely have a lot of liability and a lot of things that they are accountable for. Particularly when AI is being used in banks, what we observed is a lot of silos is there. In terms of the data that is getting generated. And unless you have a standardization across the bank that you want to bring in, it is very difficult to manage these silos, and something that you can't keep up over a period of time. So when it comes to data governance, there is also this model governance, which is another parallel out there, because compliance these days, as AI is being used, is not just on data, but also on the model. What data sets are being used, what training data has been used, who has access to a particular model, and who has visibility to a particular model. How do you limit visibility of the models? How do you limit visibility of the data that is getting generated and whatnot? So definitely agree with my fellow partners here. And I think that over a period of time, these practices, some of them are in infant stages, but in the next few years, there will be a lot of rigorous standardization that will be in place across the banks on how do we follow standard governance practices for data, standard governance practices for models, so that all the organization feels safe and reliable on the compliance part.
Thank you, Harish. And I think all of us kind of talked about how critical it is to have good data quality, breaking down the silos, data governance, as well as standardization, privacy, entitlements, all the things that are really important for AI. Let's go to the next topic and question, which is around, traditional operations in the bank, whether it's payments, fraud, AML, contact center. They have employed a good bit of people, hundreds of people, if not more, in each of those departments. And there's a lot of handoffs, a lot of workflows, a lot of manual kind of activities that goes on in those departments. In your organization, in your experience, how does AI add value, in those kind of operational environments and circumstances? So, Ron, I'll hand it over to you to get you the first speak on it, and then we'll move to the other panelists here.
Thank you very much, Rashu. Yeah, this one I'm very passionate about, because honestly, this is what led me to leave Goldman Sachs and join Deepsee. I've managed for 14 years different teams that did tasks, whether it was reconciling trade documentation, overseeing trade booking, and even populating and interpreting data sources that were used for trades and reporting all over the world. And it's hard because there is so much different data formats, different structure, and like a complex amount of knowledge that you build in your team to train them how to do their job. And then you continually build upon that as you want to trade a new product or do a new function or interpret a new regulation. And so there's just a lot to learn that we really expect all the teams doing these operations to just know. And sure, we have like procedures that write down how to do their general function, but really the deeper understandings to understand the nuance there is quite complex. And there's not a great way of, or at least not a great way that we've seen to capture all that, especially in the more broader functions. We feel that the NLP advances and the ability to apply different types of tools around AI models can be applied and be taught by those users that have this largely stuck in their head and experience that they've built over time. You can use that to train a model to execute those tasks. So whether or not they're looking at 3 screens of 3 different versions of a data, they're doing this complex finger tracing to understand what they need to match across, and then they're applying that logic in their head that even though it says B over here, it means A in this system, and they can apply that knowledge and codex. AI models are very well suited to sort through any sort of data, apply that base logic, and then present to the user, hey, this is my prediction. I think this is right. To essentially found, through going through hundreds of items, these are the 3 that we predict you need to look at. And what's great about that for an operations team is that what they get excited about in the morning. That's what they get paid for. Apply their knowledge and judgment to exceptions identified by an AI model, and then make a difference and save, or mitigate some facet of risk for the business they support. Additionally, what's really cool is then they get to turn that into a supervised learning token that gets fed back into the model, so it continues to get smarter and smarter. And really feel like this augmented workflow is the biggest opportunity within capital markets, and quite frankly, almost every data-driven team and process that's out there. So that's what I think is going to change and where the opportunities are.
That's a great example, Ryan. Thank you for sharing that. Other panelists on the call, use cases or your experience with this area?
Yeah, go ahead.
So in operations space, AI is used in a lot of scenarios. So things like you already mentioned about call center scenario, fraud detection scenarios. AI can use to automate things, and things like reconciliation of data. AI is used, and then other areas are how determine the data quality itself, like how good the data is for this purpose, and whether the new data coming is like qualify or fulfill the unit test or not. So that's where AI is used. And also things like which infrastructure is likely to fail, IT infrastructure, or which jobs are likely to fail. That's where AI can be useful. And we also look into areas in other tech companies, like which part of our code and testing we have redundancies, or where we have less coverages. So that's also AI can be useful. But in call center scenarios in banks, AI is used a lot.
Harish, go ahead.
Yeah, I think just to add to that point, what we observed has been that there are many ways on how you can make existing operations more efficient in terms of better voice bots, better chat bots, where majority of the answers could be done at the very first level of an AI model. But we also have seen that traditionally a lot of models, when they are like statistical models, you have a very straightforward way of taking the decision. But as you move towards machine learning AI, there is additional layers you're introducing in terms of the prediction, because now you have training data set, you have feature set, feature vector that you consider in terms of the decision process. I think a lot of it is moving towards the more advanced machine learning techniques from the regular standardized statistical methods. And as we move towards this process, we have seen that from an infrastructure standpoint, it is very important to think of adopting good practices because sometimes people might adopt like one-off things that might not scale. Or that might, cause a lot of hidden technical debt into the organization. That's why, from an infrastructure IT standpoint, making sure that there is a practice that is getting adopted across the bank, or making sure that whatever they are doing, it's not like a one-off work, but can be reusable across multiple parts of the bank is the key for the success.
Great point. Marina.
Maybe one,
Yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
one quick item. Harish, I really like that idea about sort of applying next level or higher level AI models against it. And that's one of the things that we're finding out is as we partner with groups, you get this initial sort of, we think of it as like a level 1 insight. Questions that they know, a process that they're doing, they're wanting to automate that an AI can do. But what we're finding more and more interesting is that when you build this corpus of data that shows not only what the raw data was, but what's extracted, and then the decisions that were made across multiple sources, then you can apply that, additional AI models to pull out what we think of as level 2 insights. And those are questions that they didn't know to ask, but they've always felt that were out there. A perfect example, especially in the finance and capital market space, is what is the cost of a certain client? How many times across their entire spectrum of trading, do you have trade breaks? Do you have resolution problems with? What's that time? What are certain areas that come across certain products? We're really finding that AI is going to unlock a huge treasure trove of insights for folks to, really change their business, not just run it more effectively in a more scalable way, but change it to make it efficient where they didn't realize they're inefficient at the moment. So I think you're right. It's that tools that are answering those deeper level questions are the ones that are going to be shared across all the different problems and are going to be reused over and over within an organization most effectively.
Yep, that's a great point. Thank you.
Good point. Good point. I'll probably keep us moving. We've got about 20-25 minutes left in the call. A few more areas to cover. So the next question for the group here, and this is a really good question. It's a very interesting, and I've seen all kind of operating models, from a centralization, decentralization, federated environments point of view. But I think the heart of the question is more about what kind of team do you want to build out, and what kind of collaboration do you need to have, both internally, externally, within your teams, within the bank or the financial institution, and probably also with the vendors to make AI work. And I think, I always say AI is a team sport. It requires skills of various kinds, from business to data engineering to platform engineering, ML ops, obviously data science itself, but also, within the processes, deliver the insights. So there's a lot of skills here that are in play. So Marina or Harish, I'll hand it over to you first, and then we'll go through the panel here. I think this is a real good question. So let's hear everybody's thoughts.
Sure.
Yeah,
I'm happy to jump in, Harish, if you don't mind.
Yeah, please go ahead.
I think just as we discussed a few moments ago, there's such a myriad number of use cases where AI can be incredibly helpful in order to augment a human's ability to do their job and to do it well, right? So AI is especially skilled, essentially, at sifting through huge amounts of data, finding trends, and really providing those insights up for a human to then take forward and exercise judgment and decision making. But I think, as financial services and banks in particular are heavily regulated, when implementing AI, whether it's internally built or whether it's obtained from a third party, there are typically reviews that have to occur by various stakeholders And so these, from my experience, they involve certain core groups and then certain tangential groups depending on the topic. So from a core group perspective, I'm involved, for instance, from a compliance standpoint. And then, of course, we have colleagues from legal and risk and third-party due diligence, information security, and then potentially others such as the privacy office, depending on the type of data that we're working with. And so speaking from a compliance standpoint, I look at whether, for instance, the use of the AI tool and the model is well articulated. Do we have the right to use the data that it's being trained on? If we're doing that, if we're using data, are we pulling it correctly from in-house systems? Are we making sure that we're doing that with the appropriate controls, access right management, and retention? And also looking at the AI setup and the workflow, have we satisfied supervisory and record retention, regulatory obligations in leveraging and implementing this type of AI? Do we have an escalation protocol? Because AI is still relatively new, and are we using it appropriately? Are we making judgments that then, for instance, if it impacts a customer, does that customer have a way of raising their hand and saying, no, I want you to reevaluate this judgment, I think there's a potential issue. And to that end, are the results and the decision-making by the AI transparent? And are we providing appropriate notice and disclosures to both our internal and external users in terms of how we use that AI? So I think that's just sort of a handful of the main areas and main considerations that we look at when we're evaluating an AI model. But the compliance review, as I said, with the other stakeholders collectively, comprise both the local and potentially global governance streams that then enable a consistent approach across the platform and the organization in evaluating the AI model, and also in providing visibility to senior management and the board in terms of where AI is being implemented and how it's being used. Harish, over to you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you so much. I think you pretty much covered all the points that I was thinking of. But I think just one point is that traditionally AI has been viewed as a, like a specialist field for a set of developers or a set of modelers who are mainly focused on modeling. But as this AI is impacting a lot of decisions at different levels of the business, there is a need where IT people, they have certain questions that they are accountable for. There is a need for governance people who are accountable for certain things. Compliance and legal teams, they are accountable for certain things. Security people are accountable for the level of security that can be applied. So I think that's where the collaboration is really coming live and more practical. Given that previously, if you just have a model and the modeler is the only person mainly accountable, but it's moving away from that into a more collaborative approach, cross-functional teams, not just limited to technical teams, but also non-technical teams. Like one of the point being, for example, from a compliance and governance angle, you have to show evidence when a model gets audited, for example. You need to show that you have proper process controls in production environment to make sure your models, if they have any issues, they can take some actions as an evidence. These type of things, it's not like a one person or a one team, it's actually multiple teams that are involved. And that's where even the siloed part comes in, which we discussed previously. Unless you have a proper way of bringing this AI models and the data sets together, it's very difficult to answer these questions, which is directly relating to increasing the risk of the bank.
And Harish, I feel like your part there of bringing the data and the models together represents the organizational challenges as well. Because largely what we find is you've got on this side in any organization, you have the data scientists, extremely smart, and the folks that have traditionally worked with vendors to bring on, tool sets that they can build very, complex and capable models that are data starved. On the other hand, you have like the line of business that are in charge of supporting, trade functions or compliance functions or finance, and they're in charge of reviewing data and creating it. However, they're waiting for efficiency and risk mitigation to come from the data scientists. The data scientists are waiting for data to come from the line of business, and they're just not working well together. So you have disappointing AI tools altogether. And we really find that the more you can bring those two together and help automate and extract and pull data out to automate this, creates a richer data set that can be fed into the models of the data scientists, and then you get wins all around the organization, rather than two different groups that are very sort of dissatisfied and finger pointing internally.
I think my experience has been that the tools meant for data scientists are not the tools meant for operations or governance in general. So anything that happens when it comes to model development or prior to developing the model, it's very difficult to bring all the people onto the same page because everybody has a different preference set of tools. So I think the way I would see this might evolve is for each functional areas. For example, if you want to develop models, you might prefer certain environments. Whereas if you want to actually govern the models, you might prefer a different environment. It's very difficult to have a one-size-fits-all solution for everyone because everybody's interests are very different. And what would be the focus areas will also be different, given that from a modeling perspective, from the data scientists, they're all focused about using the next generation algorithms to improve, whereas from a governance perspective, they're all worried about compliance and risk of the models. So these are two different aspects, and that's why there is it's very difficult to have one tool that might address all the needs.
Yeah, good point. Prashant, I want to hand it over to you. So the question is, who gets involved in the process of using AI? What kind of collaboration do you need? So over to you.
So everyone get involved. So examples are anybody who makes decisions are consumer of AI. So even in school, if you put the food in a different order, the consumption changes. So similarly in enterprises, how we create choices, how we position various choices, the consumer of those choices act differently. So through AI, we create tools so that the decision maker can interrogate data and can make decisions. Anybody who makes decisions get impacted, and they are the consumer of AI. In general, as you already covered, like on one side, there are researchers and data scientists who investigate what is possible, and then modeler build the model for forecasting, and then compliance and legal and privacy team ensure things are robust, and then MLOps ensure model runs in production. And then there are additional teams like data discovery team who try to determine how using AI we can surface the knowledge across the company faster. These are like internal collaboration. External collaborations are like we work with universities, we work with various vendors, again to know what is feasible, and then we learn from them. And many times we work with vendor to operationalize the things. So external collaborations are generally either for research or for implementation.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, and I'll share my perspective. I think one of the emerging things, and I'm really passionate about this one, is really treating AI as a product. Because it really, you have to think about it as a software product, and just like any product, it has a number of components that go into it, which is business, data engineering, functional knowledge, model, algorithms, insights, intelligence, pipeline operations. And treating it as a product is certainly a way to help operationalize and move AI into insights which can be delivered in the hands of the people. I take Google Maps as a great example always in my company. So I'm passionate about that area. But anyway, we'll get to the next topic, and I think this is going to be a tricky question. So let's flash that question, and I'm going to ask you all. Let's see the question first. It's coming through. Yeah. What use case hasn't worked for you all? Or in your experience where you put in the right kind of investments and it's just not possible, or the returns are not great. So anybody wants to go in first on this?
Yeah, I can go first. Nobody else wants. So again, these are my personal views and learnings. And these are based upon the work I did earlier at Microsoft and Google. So I won't go specific to the use cases, but the learnings were like many times companies go through 3 iterations before they are semi-successful in the use case. And one of the reason can be that companies do not have clarity between what is a good experimentation versus what are the routine failures, and things are mixed up. So to innovate, one has to experiment, and to experiment, every experiment will not be successful. So one needs to have this philosophy that, okay, these are the things that can be done through experimentation, but that doesn't mean that we start doing routine things as an experiment and accept their failure. So like building pipelines or building tools, these are not experimentation, and these can be done better by hiring like right resources or like with better planning. Now, to go more into details, like examples of use cases that generally fails or where team misses a few things. So there is a general approach teams use like A/B testing with users or with consumers. That's the right approach. In many domains, they miss that all the users they are putting into control versus in treatment. There is a attrition and there is a spillover. So users who are supposed to get treatment didn't got it. There is attrition, and users who are not supposed to get a treatment actually got it. And because they are working as a A/B test, so all their results can be either wrong or can be good, but because of luck, but actual analysis is wrong. So that is one area where many experiments go wrong. The other area, and it is applicable in finance domain, many times we use raw data, and raw data doesn't have statistical properties. So example is, if you take any finance data, even like house sale data or stock data, it comes at irregular intervals. So just using raw data and building AI on that will not be successful until we transform the data and make it bring it into a shape where it can be useful for AI. The other areas you talked about call center, and you talked about a few other scenarios related to users, like Google Map example you gave. Many times companies try to build model using high level concept. If you take an example of Google Map, like, okay, Google Map may be using things like, okay, where do you like to eat? And when new companies try to implement such scenario, they again try to use raw data and try to use too much of historical information where you like to eat. But the raw data is not observable. It needs to be transformed into higher level concept, and then only it can be used. And that's how Google Maps work. But new companies generally make that mistake, and their use cases generally fail. One more example is many times companies fail to know what are intervening or mediating variables. So they look into what is the input and what is the output, but in between there are mediating variables that impact the study. So these are various examples where I see use cases fail, like if they do not know whether it is an experimentation use case or it's a routine software development use case, or whether the data has good statistical properties. If they are dealing with users, one needs to ensure that attrition and spillover, or they're not using too much of historical data and converting into concept. Yeah, by taking into account, like one can convert these use cases into successful use cases.
Good. Now, you covered a lot of ground there, Prashant, and thank you for the use cases. I'll give the opportunity to one of the panelists to kind of talk about this area, and we'll move on to the last question. But before I do, does anybody else want to cover this topic and provide your perspective on use cases that you observed are not successful? Okay.
The only other question that I would say is, Prashant, I've seen that concept of historical data. And I know we don't have time for this thing. I'd love to talk to you offline on transforming it into concepts, because we've often found when we're given data, oftentimes it's the older data that can be available. So you train a model in that, but it hasn't kept up to what's currently used in production. And so then you don't get the results that you want. And I'm very interested, that's where we've always seen fails. So we've learned how to source current data, use that to drive creating our trading sets that are more easy. But your whole concept, I'm going to have to reach out to you afterwards and talk about the conceptual part. It sounds like you're onto something big.
Yeah, look forward to talking to you. Thanks.
Good. So we're about 3 minutes left or 5 minutes left. There's a last question we need to cover the ground. And what I'll ask each of our panelists, just maybe in 1-2 sentences, kind of talk about this. This is a strategy question. Where does AI go for the bank, and what does banks do to adopt that going forward to make it more prevalent in decision making? So, Ryan, do you want to go first, and then we can go around the table?
No, sure. No, happy, and I think this is a theme that we've hit on. But AI needs to bring more folks into the fray as far as adopting what their solutions can be. You have folks that are great at doing the governance and compliance. You have folks that are great, that are the data scientists building the models using those tools. And then you have sort of the line of business that are trying to drive what business outcomes they need. I think that collaborative team, and I'm going to steal your word, Rashu, of AI as a product. The more you get that whole holistic group coalescing around that product, then you're going to get the effective solution that's acceptable for all regulations and really just has that outcome. So I feel it's more organizational. I feel like the technology is evolving and is there, but the more we bring the whole organization to shape it, the more effective it will be.
Very well said, Ryan. Thank you so much for sharing that. Prashant?
Yeah, I think going forward, one area where AI will evolve is currently everyone is working on neural network. And I think that there will be higher levels of abstraction layer built, and then people will be focusing on their optimization function, and people will just specify that what they are optimized for. And I think that's where AI will have a lot of turbo boost effect, and that will be compound effect. And then I think in general recognition that when we build software, we build with a mindset that, okay, it has a life, it will be reusable. But when we start doing development in AI, experiment will be disposable. So figuring it out, like which pieces are disposable versus which piece needs to be reusable. That's where I think there will be a lot of innovation will happen in AI. One last comment is, I think AI will make a lot of progress if we can learn high value policies with less amount of experience. So like currently in robotics and other domain, we are trying to learn what all is happening in the real world. The real worlds are very complex. So if we can start creating a simpler world where we can learn high value policies, then AI will have a lot of promise.
A great insight, Prashant. I really love that. Thank you for sharing. Harish?
Yeah, definitely. I think as AI is getting adopted, definitely there is a lot of hesitation right now to adopt AI across different departments. But having some sort of regular practices, good practices to adopting ahead of time, and really like understanding that a lot of times AI models might make decisions that might not be in alignment, but like having a reliable and safe environment to run those is the key. And like things like what Prashant mentioned about A/B testing, for example. How do you put a lot of guards when things go wrong is very, very important. So I think definitely in alignment with that.
Got it. Great. And Marina, I'll give you the last word on this one. So over to you.
Thank you, appreciate it. I think for me, I would echo the points that my co-panelists have made. I think they're excellent and very well thought out. From my perspective, it's really just this overarching realization, AI is no longer nice to have. It's really an expectation. And I think that banks and financial services generally, we need to adapt and innovate. I think there needs to be those firms that are successful will have a clearly articulated holistic strategy for AI with investment in tools and infrastructure and the staff to really bring those models to fruition and help take the bank forward.
Thank you. Now, it's been a true pleasure talking to each of you and being a co-panelist and a moderator. It was a real great experience. I hope you all got really good perspectives and insights from this conversation. Unfortunately, our time is coming to end. So I'm going to hand it over back to Pratika for her last words on this.
Wow, this has been awesome. Thank you all so much. A special thank you to all of our panelists and an extra special thank you to Rashu for moderating and keeping us on track. This has been amazing, and I know this virtual audience is going wild with virtual applause. Thank you again for sharing and taking time to share your perspectives with us today. For the audience, it's time for you to make your way to your next session. Along the way, make sure you accept your connection request and take some time to check out our amazing exhibits. Thanks so much, and we'll see you around.